Hello everyone, welcome to already the 8th edition of the B2B Influencer Marketing Chat Series. My name is Mariska Kestelo and today, the topic of today is actually influencers and brands. What are we allowed to do and what not? This is not just it is a simple question, but not a simple answer to give. And therefore, I'm very delighted to have Rupa Shah. She's the owner of #Ad Consulting. And together with her, we will dive further in this very important topic, which is often forgotten actually not only by the influencers, but sometimes also by the brands. And Rupa Shah is actually an authority in the industry, and she's an expert in compliance or in the field of compliance. Rupa, thank you very much for joining our show. Great to have you in these challenging times. Would you like to share some background information before we go further with the questions?
Thanks, Mariska. Hi, yes, I'm Rupa Shah. I am founder and director of #Ad Consulting. That's a London consulting firm, and I established the firm a couple of years ago after working for the Advertising Standards Authority, or the ASA, in London for around about 13 years. So my experience is very much in the regulatory side of advertising. Initially, all types of advertising. I was looking at magazine out of outdoor advertising, all sorts of posters, and so my career through the ASA involved investigations, compliance work, everything, the whole remit. But as it got to sort of 2014, 2015, we started to see more influencer advertising, influencer marketing, and the complaints started to come in, and it became more than just as a sort of a minor topic. Everyone within the industry, the whole advertising industry, realized that this is an area that needed some guidance. I was involved in assisting with drafting some guidance, but gradually realised that actually there was an opportunity here to provide this guidance directly to the industry. So I founded #Ad Consulting, and now I provide sort of training documents, workshops when we're not in lockdown, and various methods of online e-courses, that type of thing, to guide the industry, brands, advertisers, agencies, everybody on what they need to do to comply with the rules for influencer marketing. Because it's all about education and making people realize that there are rules, and why they might apply to your scenarios, what you can do with them, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the good introduction, because I actually forgot to mention the topic, because today it's all about brands and influencers, what they can do and what they are allowed to do. I think that a lot of people are so much unaware that there are, I would say, rules and regulations for influencers. We work, of course, in a B2B environment, but what we see in a B2C environment, we think it's still, I would say, a bit of the Wild West. Now there are not much regulations. Influencers can do anything, I would say, almost anything that they want. If we talk about the B2B environment, for example, I'm a company. We work in the meetings and events world. So, for example, I am a hotel, and I would like to start a B2B influencer marketing campaign. What are actually because this topic is quite, I would say, unknown area for lots of people. So what are actually the first steps? For example, if I want to start working with influencers, before I get in touch with the influencers, what are things that I need to be aware of, or what I can do, or where can I find more information about this topic?
Sure. So as a brand, you hold responsibility for understanding and complying with the rules, but equally so does the influencer. So it's very important that as a brand, you play some part in educating your influencers, because if they make a mistake, and it's very easily done, that will reflect upon your brand, and the regulators across the globe will hold the brand responsible, as well as the influencer. So it's very important to understand what the rules are for the jurisdictions which you are in. Generally, across the globe, there are some similarities, because what we've seen is there are some issues such as disclosure, which are the same across the globe. And when I talk about disclosure, I mean making clear that this is marketing.
Yeah.
And it's really important because this is a basic rule in practically every code, every jurisdiction, that an ad should look like an ad. It's simple, but it's important that consumers, whether this is B2B or B2C, everybody understands that what they're seeing is not organic, natural content from an influencer, that there is some kind of commercial relationship there. So that's, I mean, the first thing to realize, and it's quite almost a common sense rule how to apply this at the starting point is, you know, how can I make clear that whether this is an employee who is endorsing my product or this is a thought leader, that I potentially have found a commercial way of encouraging them to send this message. So disclosure is the key thing, and to understand that you should be disclosing. And there are some nuances, and you know, depending on how that influencer chooses to spread the message for you, or whether you're telling them we would like you to write a blog, or you know, so there may be different ways of disclosing, but ultimately that's the very first step, I would say.
So, and is there, for example, is there also, say, sort of a platform internationally where I can say, okay, where I can find more information? Any sources? Okay, you mentioned already the ASA, but of course, this association is in every country. Of course, is different. Of course, I suppose the hotels know, if especially have the PR department. But of course, there are also a lot of small companies, especially in the meetings and events industry, where they perhaps don't have, I would say, an entire PR department, or perhaps an entire social media department. So are there also, say, information or associations where we can address and say, okay, where we can find the latest rules and regulations, and also concerning disclosure about this topic?
Yeah, so I mean, the regulatory, across Europe, mostly we have self-regulatory authorities, just like the ASA in England, in the UK. You will have, for example, the ARPP in France. And I mean, as I said, generally the rules are similar, but this is the first point of call if you want some guidance as a brand. There should be guidance documents. It's not necessarily that you need to speak to an investigator directly. There will be guidance documents online directly related to influencer marketing, and that's important. But also what you want to be aware of is that the rules for conferencing, marketing events, that type of thing, there will also be rules for each sector. So yes, look at influencer marketing, look up, you know, what you should be doing for influencer marketing, but also be aware that there might be some specific scenarios for this industry that you need to think about, because there are, I mean, we see certain claims that you'll see repeated, you know, the number one, we are the best, we're the best selling, that type of thing to look out for. So it all, and it's very easy for influencers to make these errors because they're passionate about a product or a company, and they want to do their best and market product, but they might bring in these types of claims without being asked to do so. But yeah, I think it's, look to your self-regulatory authority. There's likely to be one for your country. But also, for example, my consultancy, #ad, I do blog and I give advice on the rules across the globe. There is EASA, the European Advertising Standards Alliance. They occasionally put out information. Mostly it's to their own members, but actually they are engaging with the industry more at conferences and events. So if you're a brand or a hotel group, for example, it's worth attending the influencer marketing events to get an idea of what the regulations are.
Okay, well, I mean, it's really interesting what you said, that you don't need also to look towards the meetings and events, but also towards the industry. So if you, for example, organize a pharmaceutical event, you need to apply, I would say, two laws, if I say it in, or perhaps say it in a more simple way. So it's good that you're saying, because I don't think everyone is aware of that. I mean, at least from my perspective, I don't think everyone is aware about that. That of course, you organize a meeting and event and you have an influencer who's coming from the meetings and events industry. But yeah, you're promoting perhaps a pharmaceutical conference, then you also have to apply those rules and regulations. So that's interesting. And okay, from an influencer perspective, of course, we assume that they are aware. But yeah, as we work in a B2B environment, we don't work with, I would say, the typical influencers like in a B2C environment. Like you said already, we work It could be employees, it could be thought leaders, could also be independent people. So it's much more diverse, and sometimes they even have also different jobs at the site. So they might not know also, I would say, perhaps it might not be their daily job. So what are for them actually the steps? And so we say, are those the same sources of information like you mentioned? And ASA?
I think it's actually almost easier for influencers, whether it's B2B or B2C, to get this information. I feel like a lot of the information that's put out by the authorities is very much directed at influencers. So it's what might be difficult if you're B2B is to be able to cross apply, because much of the guidance, especially here in the UK, is very much aimed at B2C, because a lot of the rulings and the mistakes are picked up on, and we see those ASA rulings. There's, for example, the reality TV stars and the celebrities. That's what's coming out. So there's a ton of guidance, but for B2B, the rule that we know, very similar rules apply. The differences that you often see is in the editorial control. So quite often with B2B, there is less of the, we are telling you exactly what to do, and we want 5 posts a week on your Instagram. It's a different dynamic, and it may just be simply a case of sending a product and hoping for the best at the very least, or maybe a little direction. How would you like to contribute to this blog, or that type of thing. So the dynamic and the instructions are different, but ultimately what you have to remember is there is that commercial relationship, which means that the rules are going to kick in, and there are rules. So the first of them very much in terms of finding out about, how do I disclose, should I be disclosing, where do I put that this is an ad, and I know it's a really uncomfortable conversation actually in the B2B space, and I can see it, and I understand there are many objections from brands who feel that it's not the same as B2C, and why do we need to apply the same rules? But I mean, and I've engaged with the regulators to try and find a little bit more, and find out if there are exemptions for the B2B space. But at least here in the UK, not really. I think if everybody wants to feel like they understand when they are being advertised to, whether that's in a business context or whether that's in a personal, I'm purchasing something for myself.
Indeed,
I mean, that's the advantage of
clarity. You want a clarity as a consumer if this is really is it someone who get paid. I would say someone who get paid to write that post, despite that it's someone with expertise or coming someone and from the industry, and he gets paid. Of course, that it's still a bit. Perhaps the content feels a little bit different. So. Yeah, I think it's like what you said, clarity is needed. You also want to know if that person is right that post from, even if it's from an expertise point of view. You want to know if there's a commercial belonging somewhere. So I think it's it feels very natural, like you said. It's common sense.
It is common sense, but I mean, I get presented with scenarios where it's really difficult because, for example, you might have sent somebody a laptop, for example, 6 months ago, but it's featured in the background and they're talking about something else. So the question is, do they still need to continue to disclose they were sent that 6 months ago, that type of thing? So there will always be hundreds of scenarios, B2B or B2C, where it's not as clear cut, understandably. And I think this is where it's important for the regulators and everybody involved in the industry to seek out extra information and to provide clarity on the rules.
Of course. So can you because also something, because we work today, we're all connected online. We are in very special times, and we work also now much more easily, perhaps some people across borders. So, for example, if I'm a company and I want to work with influencers, for example, I'm a German-based company and I work with influencers from Helsinki. But of course, the message goes across borders. I mean, online we don't have any borders. Are there also specific, I would say, from the company point of view, but also from the influencer point of view, are there any specific, I would say, information that we need to know, because I assume that the rules are perhaps in Germany, I know they're quite strict.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
So yeah, Germans, no, it's a joke, but also from Scandinavia. So it might be. So I think it's also important to know from an influencer's perspective, but also from a company's perspective. What do you have anything experience
Yeah,
with
I
that?
think it's a good question actually to ask about when there are cross-border audiences and where people are based. It's something that I know the regulators get asked a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about in terms of who the audience is, less so of where the brand or the influencer are based.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if the influencer is in the UK, the brand is in America.
Mm-hmm.
If that influencer has an audience in France,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
they are promoting the product, and you can, and potentially they are using French as the language, or there is some way that they are promoting a product that can be purchased in France, then technically you will be invoking the French rules. The French rules for influencer marketing will apply, because you could be misleading French citizens. So what you need to think about is, who are you marketing to? Who will see this message? Who can act upon it? Who could actually purchase this product or make a decision? Where are they based? Because those rules may apply. And it's a really important thing to note, because I think you could be assuming as an influencer, most of my audience is in the UK, but actually, you might have mentioned that you can buy this product in dollars, and you've got a couple of hundred people in America. It's possible that the FTC in America, if they don't like the way you're marketing, if you're breaking their rules, they could take action, and they have done in the past against UK influencers. So yes, it's worth really looking into who you're marketing to and who can see your message.
Yeah, of course, because like I said, we work in the meetings and events industry. We are very used to work very international, especially for promote destination. It's often they want to have influencers from different destinations. For example, like I mentioned, from Germany towards and towards Finland. So it's very important then to know, even if that person is based in Germany, but perhaps the majority of the audience might be coming from the Netherlands. So then it's so you really need to focus on that. So is that also something that because if we're talking also about contracting, do you think that also this information should be added in a contract, because that there are no misunderstandings as well from the brand, as well from the influencer, that also the influencer can discuss this item? Because I think a lot of influencers from both sides are not discussing this topic during negotiations.
I agree. And I agree actually that the fact that you mentioned contract is important, because there's not always a contract. So it's a good idea to have one. And certainly, I mean, even if you don't, at the very minimum, as a brand, be advising that influencer that, it's not just enough to say, follow the rules. What are those rules? Which body should they be looking to? In a contract, you could include links to the regulations that are applicable. And going beyond that, actually stating very clearly, our expectations are that you do use in the UK #ads or webung or whatever the disclosure clause for your country is. And we want it, we expect to see it prominently at the start of every post. It's almost becoming standard where contracts are used, at least in the UK. Big agencies and the big brands are including this information now. So I'd like to see it across the board, but I think the struggle is that not everyone is using a contract, and they feel, brands sometimes feel these are informal relationships, and it might just be an email here and there, and there may not be something, in full detail. But it's certainly advisable. The FTC have, in their own judgments and rulings over in America, have made it very clear they expect this information to be put into contracts. So I think we can follow their lead, whichever jurisdiction you're in.
Okay, well, I think it's very good that we have this conversation, so to create that awareness, because like I said at the beginning, it's been a bit of a wild west in the B2C, but also in a B2B environment. so that it's also sort of, as we're growing further, it's getting more professional, that we need to educate as well as our clients, as well as perhaps the influencer, and create more awareness, and have also the courage for influencers to address this topic, because at the end, who's responsible? The influencer is actually I would say, executing the work. So and they can also harm the brand if this will be in the news. You don't want to be you don't want to be
exactly,
negative.
yeah.
You don't want to be negative in the news by something that you both might have overseen, or the influencer wanted to address, but didn't have the courage to talk about this topic during negotiations, in order to lose the contract, perhaps.
I agree. I think it's like you say, you should highlight the risks. There are risks, and this is obviously, it isn't just that the regulators can take action. It is to the fact that the media will pick up on these stories of a brand not complying, and if they feel that it's a deceptive practice, that's the perfect story. A brand, potentially an influencer, somebody, this is what the media like, and they will go with these stories. And having worked at the UK regulator, the ASA, I'm fully aware of the tactics they use, and they use the media, rightly so, because they don't impose fines, but they use the media because that can be devastating to a brand who values their reputation. And certainly in the B2B space, that reputation is very, very important. So it's very important to make sure the influencers you work with are complying, as well as yourself.
Indeed, like you said, you can harm your reputation, and especially in a B2B environment where the lead time, for example, if we talk about in our industry towards organizing a conference or getting a large conference towards your destination, the lead time is quite long, and it's not something that is decided from one day into another. So, and then if you harm your reputation by working with an influencer who's not compliant, or it's put in a very different perspective, despite that the influencer might be a professional, then it could harm much more than it will deliver. Can you give some good and perhaps some bad examples that people understand, I would say, the impact that it has, or the value to put the compliance in your contract? Can you mention some examples?
Sure. So certainly in my time at working for the Advertising Standards Authority, we saw against a tech company, a ruling caused a large drop in share price, actually, because the negativity from the ruling, and it was because of a deceptive practice. It wasn't influencer marketing, but it is a technique that the ASA will use now for influencer marketers. But it caused this particular tech company to drop, for their share price to drop quite significantly, because the media picked up on the shop practices, they called it, of their advertising, and it roller coasted. And the ASA are very good at making sure that the right news outlets get hold of this story and can keep running it. Nowadays, the regulators, if their breaches are online, if the rule breaking happens online, they use online sanctions to tackle them. And so against there was a large hotel group when I was working at the ASA who were not complying with an ASA ruling, refusing to comply. And the ASA, they used their online sanctions to target the hotel group by making sure that by using SEO, a search engine optimization, so that the Advertising Standards Authority ruling was appearing before that hotel group's listing and in search listings. So not only was that the ruling was appearing, a second listing by the Advertising Standards Authority outlining the rule breaking was also appearing. So they were hitting them quite hard, and it was frustrating the hotel group to the point where they made changes very quickly the instant this happened. So it's a very effective sanction. I think if a rule breaking is going online, this is not just the ASA who do this. I know it happens across Europe. The regulators will make sure that they use all of these tools to ensure compliance, because the negative publicity that follows on from this, it's not just the fact that consumers will be hit with a message that says this hotel group are misleading consumers. They're going to then have the knock-on effect of losing custom.
Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
trust. I mean,
trust.
to
Yeah,
think
so
that it's
important.
more, and harming your reputation costs so much more, because people will remember much longer a negative, I would say, a negative impact than unfortunately than a positive impact. I think, for example, the Corona crisis will also be remembered very, very long, and perhaps something positive you will, well, say, more quickly forget. So
I
therefore I
agree.
think it's, and the damage is not always measurable as well if you harm your reputation, because you cannot, of course you can make an estimation of your impact of losing your I say your loyal customers. So therefore it's very important to be aware of these, I would say, of these rules and regulations. Do you have any advice? Because are the rules and disclosures, are they also changing now? The influencer marketing landscape, I would say, is getting a bit more professional and a bit more matured. So do I need to watch, I would say, watch regularly, or check the rules if I'm going to work with influencers on a regular basis, or how does it work? Because I'm not a compliance expert, far from.
Yeah, it's difficult because it's not a book. The guidance changes according to the rulings, and for every jurisdiction you will have rulings every week, every month.
Okay.
So the guidance will evolve, and yes, technically you should be on the ball every week checking to see what the rulings are, because even if the ruling doesn't say influencer marketing, it might be, as I said, it might be something to do with your industry, or it might be the claims are relevant. Somebody is using a number one claim where your brand felt that they were number one.
Okay.
There are so many scenarios that could potentially affect your brand, that yes, it's not a case of I do a course, I've learned what I need to do, it's done and over with. It's a matter of always knowing these rules are changing and evolving. How to do it? Well, there, as I said at the start, there are various sources. The Committee of Advertising Practice here in the UK provide information. I do various YouTube videos and I post them on LinkedIn. So there are people like myself out there who try to make these rules more palatable and easy to digest, and
that's what I wanted to say. Yeah, a bit more human language for everyone, because I'm not native English. So to read those rules and regulations for others who might on the call, it's not always easy to also clearly understand what does it mean for what does it mean for me, and what does it mean for my project evolving.
That's it.
Yeah.
I agree. I think that was the part of why I started my business, to break it down and to make it easier for whichever industry you're in, but to understand what these rules are, because they're so relevant, they're so important, and to be caught out can be devastating. So to be caught out just because you didn't understand the rule, it doesn't make sense. So let's make it easier for the industry to understand what they need to do, what their obligations are, and to help them to comply.
And just also the practical question, because we work on a long term with influencers. So if we sign a contract according to the rules that are at that moment applicable, but if B2B influencer marketing campaigns tend to be long, sometimes 6 months, can be also for over a year. What happens if those disclosure, those rules might change during the length of the contract? Do you have any experience with that?
I do. I mean, here in the UK, we've had some changes in terms of what we accept, for example, for affiliate marketing and the types of labels that are acceptable. At the start of the year, it was probably last year acceptable to use the word affiliate. The ASA did some research, and now they think that consumers don't understand this word. Actually that should be highlighted as an ad or advertising instead. So there is the potential for there to be a key change. It's not hugely likely, but it could happen for in terms of the labels that you're advising your influencers to use. The regulatory authorities would probably have some sympathy, but because this is initially what you said in your contract, but they would find it surprising if there has been no dialogue between yourself as a brand and the influencer from the point of that contact. So there is a level of responsibility where you would have been expected to say, yes, we signed the contract, this is what we said, we now know the regulations say X, Y, and Z. So ideally, you should be able to make those changes and communicate them to an influencer. But there would be a level of sympathy. It might be that, in the UK, the way the rulings are set out, the brand gets a chance to respond if a complaint is made, and you could see that response in full, which is an important part of a ruling, I think, to understand everybody's perspective. So you would be able to state that, and you could provide your contract to the regulator as evidence. It may not necessarily mean that it's a no breach, but it would be a sort of a mitigating circumstances.
And therefore I think, again, because we spoke about that topic previous, that influencers are humans, are professionals, so that you have also as a brand or as an agency a very good relationship with your influencers to also address this topic, and that it's not just something that a contract that you've signed from the start, that it's also, I would say, a process, that it's ongoing. And I'm not saying that you need to discuss, of course, every detail during a follow-up call, but I think it's important that you also put this topic on the agenda as you work with influencers, saying, okay, we are now 6 months later, how are we still compliant? Are we still following the actual rules? So I think it's also, and for us as well, for me as a founder, so it's also interesting to know that I also need to put this topic on the agenda, and to say, okay, are we still following the rules together with the influencer, and of course also with the client? In order, because our aim is not to harm our clients, but of course to get the best out of it. So it's interesting that we also need to put it more and more often on the agenda, also during the progress and during the project, and not only just before we start, I would say.
I agree. And actually, I think in America, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, have explicitly said that they expect brands to have a compliance strategy. So it's not a case of, okay, it's in the contract, or we've talked briefly about it and then let it go. There is a responsibility to keep that dialogue up, to keep monitoring, to keep an eye on what's going on. So I think it's less now common sense, and actually part of the rules, that there should be some strategy to make sure you are complying.
And do you see actually, I would say in your career now, a growth towards B2B influencer marketing? Do you see a huge growth, or do you see it more in the B2C environment?
Absolutely, in B2B. From my personal experience, my request for guidance on B2B has skyrocketed. I don't know if this is partly influenced possibly by lockdown, and I'm not sure how that would be. But at least in the last 3 to 4 months, there's definitely been a move towards, I think there's partly because there's so much flexibility in terms of who you might choose to be an influencer in the B2B space. It's a different way of choosing and a different type of dynamic. But certainly, I think brands who may have been more cautious in the past are putting a budget towards influencer marketing now.
Well, it actually makes sense, because normally B2B, the B2B environment is usually exists a lot of trade show events, sales calls, a lot of also personal contact, and that is at this moment, of course, it's all fallen away. So I also see that there's I'm not saying there's a growing interest, but I see that there is people are need to change their strategy, and from what used to be going offline, you need to continue those conversations online. So it makes sense that B2B influencer marketing is growing, and I'm happy with that. But and I hope that people are on the call also agree with that. But it's interesting from your point of view to see that there is, despite the crisis, that also there is also, a good positive outcome. Do you have any? I would say we're almost, wrapping up, and I don't see many questions, which means I assume we did a great job. So do you have any?
I think so.
Do you have any? Do you have any questions or any remarks or suggestions as well for brands or for influencers to say, okay, please be aware of that, or personal tips, or or any links to websites that you can suggest? I mean, I'm always very practical, so if you have any practical tips and advice for the listeners, would be great.
I think because it's still almost a fledgling industry in terms of finding the best way to do B2B, mm-hmm. I would say be very wary of the mistakes that the B2C market made very early on, mm-hmm, which mm-hmm. were almost to look around and see what your competitor was doing and assume they're doing it correctly. Yeah. At the moment, you cannot make that assumption, not in B2B. Yeah. Even the biggest brands are making mistakes in terms of disclosure. So I think that would be my biggest tip. It's not a case of seeing what everybody else is doing, because we don't have that level playing field quite yet where everybody is complying. Perhaps in 10 years time, but for now I would seek expert advice on if this is something you're keen to pursue and you don't know what the rules and regulations are, seek expert guidance.
Yeah, of course, and preferably someone who's I would say a person like you who's doing this as a daily job, and not assuming that your competitor is doing it the right way, like following the sheeps and following the others. You always have to.
Exactly. Yeah. We saw it very much in B2C, and it still happens. Some of the biggest influencers are still not doing it correctly, and celebrities don't always, and it has that effect on the new or the fresher influencers following them, and it's not the right thing to do. But the education is there for B2C now. Let's hope B2B follows.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having you, Rupa, and thank you so much for I would say for all your advice and tips, which were very, I would say, very valuable. I just get from Claudia, who's following this session, you're just saying, great session. You've spoken a lot about aspects most people normally don't think about. That's why you need a specialist. Indeed, that's correct. So thank you very much, Claudia. So next week we have another session at 3 p.m. every Thursday at 3 p.m. So we do it until the summer, until July. So we have still 3 upcoming editions. Also with Julia Solaris, who's a famous name in our industry. We have them on the 18th of June. So please stay tuned. And thank you so much for listening. And don't forget to register for the upcoming session. So thank you very much, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mariska.
Thank you, Rupa.